Would you be able to share a little bit about Willow for us now? Because I know it seems like you've been working on this for ages, like a long period of time,
Yeah,
and just
yeah.
been tracing things back, and I've noticed that I don't know how long has like it seems possibly even years, um, in a
Yeah.
way, you know.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, either I can certainly trace it back um, through my whole life in a sense. More recently, I came back to the monastic academy in 2017 or 18, uh, in part to develop the curriculum there. And eh, through a lot of twists and turns, the Willow program that I'm now in the last 2 weeks of leading was born. Uh, and so it wasn't originally why I came back, but it was made clear that that the best thing to do would be to create a kind of ulterior space where we could prototype and experiment with some shifts in the system design that I felt and that we felt were like important to experiment with.
I think this is so exciting. I think like what you're doing
Oh,
is like it's so it's so exciting. This is like yeah, and it sounds like a lot of fun as well.
oh yeah, it's fun.
Like to just like let's just like try a bunch of stuff out and like see what fits where, and let's have fun with this and explore, and it's all for such a beautiful kind of there's such a beautiful heart space behind it that it just feels like
Mm,
it feels so nice. There's something really nice and fun and like exciting about it. That's what's coming up. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different pieces for me. Like,
Yeah.
it's the first time I've been a teacher really fully in this way, like where I'm the teacher in this space. And there's all kinds of like personal challenges related to that. And so like there's like the personal aspect for me, and then there's the more just sort of like creative, uh, like
Yeah.
that this exists now at all,
And the
and that I
learning
got
that
to.
must take place. Like there's an
Oh yeah,
acceleration of learning through the teaching process. So
totally. Oh yeah. No,
wow.
it's really good. It's been a lot of fun, and I feel super grateful that um, Maple trusted me enough to let me do this, that Willow trusted me. Sation is my collaborator. She's the founder of Willow, trusted me enough to let us run this experiment here, that these like people came who in many cases I had never met, who
Yeah.
would just like entrusted their lives to this experiment for
Yeah.
3 months is wild. Yeah, that the conditions came together for this is amazing.
Tell us about
Amazing
it.
to me.
Yeah. So what's going on over there?
Yeah. Well, so how to frame it? It's a 3 month kind of neo-monastic experiment, 3 month residential training, about an hour and a half east of Toronto, and there's 8 people living together, training together full time with a modified monastic schedule. So we took the kind of schedule that we use in Vermont at the monastic academy there, and the schedule in a monastery is, as you know from your time there, is kind of like the spine of the monastery. It's
Would you be
really
able to
like,
just, before we continue, could you maybe get into a bit more detail on the schedule? Because I'm curious about, um, there's a real curiosity about this idea of making your home a monastery for me, and this idea of
mm,
like bring that back. So just a glimpse into that might be great.
yeah. So we've shifted around a bit over the last 3 months, but right now, we pushed back the start time actually just a couple weeks ago because it was staying dark later, so we wanted to have the exercise period be during the daytime. So um, we start in the morning at 5:30 a.m. with about a half hour of chanting, and so we have some chants that we do that kind of like present some of the ethical commitments and uh, intentions for how we use this time of training. And then we move into an hour of seated silent meditation. Then we do an hour exercise period every day, which is
What do you do for
really,
that?
really. Different people do different things. So, I have my own kind of physical practice, but and we help people if they come into the training and they don't have any kind of physical practice, we'll like teach them based on what they're interested in, different things to do. But it's critical, actually. Like, we will sacrifice meditation before we sacrifice exercise in the schedule.
Yeah, it's
It's really
interesting.
fundamental.
Is it like, do you go for runs or do you like do a bit of yoga or?
I do a bunch of different stuff. I do yoga. I have a banded weightlifting um, thing that I
Yeah,
do. Sometimes I'll do sprints.
yeah,
I kind
just
of
move
listen to
the
my
body.
body.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 and it's very helpful because in doing this kind of training, you can often run into patterns of energy that are really challenging and will kind of get you into rumination cycles where like the energy is stuck and you can just create a lot of problems for yourself. And so, exercise is good for a lot of reasons, but one reason it's good is that if you're exercising hard enough, you cannot sustain that, and you just have to let go
Mm.
of some whatever way of being you were coming into the period of exercise with. And so if you manage to make it through the meditation period while still having a coherent sense of self, then the exercise period is another opportunity to just like blast through that and
Yeah,
find freedom on the other side.
yeah.
So we do exercise for an hour, and that's critical. And then we have at Willow, this is it's a little different than at Maple. We have a breakfast, which is breakfast with journaling for about 50 minutes.
Okay.
So
Yep.
we have a
Straight after the exercise. Yep.
silent breakfast, and people are encouraged to journal and kind of reflect on their process. We give people different um, methods of journaling.
Yep.
And then we have a morning meeting where we do a kind of check-in, announcements, talk about the workday, and then we go into about 5 hours of work, 5 hours of like building this nonprofit basically. And so it's a bit different than most monasteries in that mostly we're doing kind of like knowledge work, so like fundraising or program design or um, you know uh, whatever else needs to be done,
Yep.
networking,
Yep.
and then we have a silent lunch for 40 minutes or so, some chores. Then we have 3 hours of self-practice time where people can kind of do whatever they feel is important: laundry, continue to meditate, whatever is most needful. And then we have the evening program at 5:30, which has been a lot of different things over the last 3 months. Now we're at the point in the program where it's kind of this harmonization circle, which I could describe in more detail, but it's a collective practice for about 2 hours, 2.5 hours, depending on how it's going. And then we end the evening with another silent sitting period and a 15-minute chant of compassion. And so the evening ends around 9 p.m.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. And then back to bed and up at 5:30 again. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So I'm just cognizant of time and I want to go a little bit deeper into Willow. I just wanted to know how much time we have and what we have, like, yeah, if we need to end it at half past or
Oh, I think I can go until at least 8, right? That's what I think what we scheduled. But I could go a little bit past that if yeah,
yeah. Okay,
pretty
cool.
flexible.
Awesome. So I'm just thinking, yeah, so thank you for sharing that. I was just thinking now, like, I'm just trying to feel into where the experimental, I mean, the whole thing's an experiment, but where the experimental components and the different types of practices come in. I know they're kind of, seems like they're kind of peppered throughout the day, but there may be a space in that 5:30 area where you shift different things in and out. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a couple pieces there. I mean, yeah, in the 5:30 period, that's definitely where a lot of what's most significantly different versus what you would see in Vermont or other monasteries, traditional monasteries. And then we also do regular retreats of like 3 days to 5 days. Um, but it's really, yeah, that evening period, and then what are the practices that we're doing, and also to a certain degree how the container is held. So in Vermont and in almost all traditional monasteries that I'm aware of, it's pretty hierarchical and kind of like I use this. I actually have a lot of fondness for this term, but authoritarian,
Mm,
right? Like they don't care what you feel, they don't care what you
mm,
think should be happening right now. You're doing it. Um, we have, and I have used a lot of like we call like non-coercive group dynamics and organizational design in terms of how the container is held. Things that I learned from like Holacracy and Occupy Wall Street. Um, these are topics that I've explored in my podcast, but basically, like, how do we kind of support wholehearted participation through mutual understanding and the presencing and surfacing of tensions of
mm,
various kinds, so
mm.
that there's like a really strong sense of coherence, harmony, and buy-in from the whole group, which itself is a whole process and is kind of underlies this sort of philosophy and framework of this experiment. Because the superordinate goal is sort of to produce harmony in the individuals, the system, the relationships, all the systems that we can interact with.
Yeah. And is just with the different elements that come into um, this. So you mentioned in a previous chat with John Viveki, this idea of the body and making sure that that's kind of at a nice base, and then the psyche, and you mentioned
Mm-hmm.
the family systems, relationships, and then the ethics piece, and then the perception. So these seem to be like underlying kind of areas that are dived more deeply into through different practices. Would you be able to go into some of those practices with me and maybe
Sure.
share about how you
Yeah, I'd love to.
open that up for the group, and maybe even a little bit about what you've learned through that process of teaching and holding those spaces?
Sure. Where is there any place in particular you'd like me to start,
I
or what?
guess, yeah, I mean, I recently had a chat with Guy Sengstock around
Oh,
circling.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was, and the whole idea of, and I've run a couple of circling sessions since, and
Huh.
that's been fun. That's been interesting.
Hmm.
Um, and it seems like that might even feed back into what you're talking about, this non-hierarchical structure, that's promoting and building that in as a sense of community and trust and intimacy there, that's strengthening the group.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess what comes
Mm-hmm.
up now is this idea of like, yeah, people coming into that space. But I was just wondering, yeah, with that practice, and also if there are any other practices that you bring into the space or experiment with, or is it just kind of these set ones that you've decided upon trying for a little while?
Mm. Yeah, so we definitely we have experimented with other practices. Like somebody here is quite practiced in something called collective presencing, which I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it's a form of sort of like collective intelligence practice, which I hadn't done before, but it is very lovely. And then we've also um, created some exercises based on our experiments in the group. Like we just created new practices together, and sort of experimented with that. But mostly we are sticking to the ecology of practices that um, I taught that are associated with those five aspects of harmonization. Um, and the circling in particular is fascinating, I think, because from my perspective, it is a kind of like foundation on top of which to build other um, collective practices on top of. And so when I mentioned the 5:30 to the thing we do in the evening part of the program, what that looks like now And this was always the goal in the program design, and I didn't know what this would look like in fact, or if we would get there, is something like a harmonization circle where we sit together in circle, the eight of us, and we're trained in all of these practices, all of these moves. And we, based on what's present and what's emerging in that field, we deploy different moves in order to bring whatever systems into harmony. And so sometimes we'll do psychological healing, sometimes we'll meditate, sometimes we'll work on the level of perception and emptiness, sometimes we'll circle a relational tension, sometimes we will do ethical reflection and sort of sense into values or tensions in that space. And we'll kind of weave back and forth between them in order to create a superabundance of harmony across all systems.
It's
But
really interesting.
that depends on there being a kind of like legibility and sensitivity to
Yeah.
harmony and disharmony within those different aspects
Yeah.
within each participant.
Mm. Yeah. There's
So
a
it took a
sense
lot
of,
of training to get to that point, but we just got there a little while ago.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a continuous, sounds like continuous thing that you'll
Oh
be,
yeah.
and it's like what's coming up in that moment and what's being called for. And it's almost like all these different practices and all these different areas of experimentation and play have built in different energetic systems within you that you can call forth when they're needed in that moment if you're sensitive enough to that
Totally.
request. It reminds me in a strange way of, have you heard of like the Amazonian dietas,
No.
where um you know shamans in the Amazon, or different people go through the process
Mm.
of dieting different plants. And for example, the rose, so you could drink rose, you fast, you don't drink anything else for weeks or months or sometimes years, and you drink or you eat sort of enough food to sustain your body, but really bland foods every couple of days, and you
Mm.
connect with the spirit of this plant. And
Mm.
then at the right moment, in a kind of a ceremonial space, when someone's requiring healing, these energetic pathways from the plant come up, and they come out in
Mm.
songs, so
Mm.
that song is sung at a certain kind of vibration, and that's the perfect thing for that moment in the perfect time.
Beautiful.
So it sounds like a similar kind of a thing, but without any of the plants and any of the shamans, but in a
Yeah,
different
well,
way.
totally, totally. Well, I think, and this is partly like, the reason that I designed this the way I did is because I saw in Vermont that people were coming with lots of different kinds of suffering.
Mm,
And to a certain degree, they expected meditation to be a cure-all for
mm,
all of those types of suffering.
mm,
And they're not like wrong. There's a certain way in which that's true. Like meditation over a long enough time horizon, practice with sufficient skill, is a kind of cure all magically, because clinging ends up being that which supports all other kinds of suffering. Sort of. But like the devil is in the details. Our lives are made up of particulars. And a lot of people, the suffering of meaninglessness is different for the most part than the suffering that meditation deals with.
mm,
The suffering of pathological neuroticism and shame is
mm,
different than what meditation is at least designed to deal with. It's
mm.
true that you can kind of make meditation support those things, and it's certainly helpful no matter what, I think, in most cases. But there's better technologies and tools if that's like the kind of suffering that's present. And so, yeah, there's a very much a sense of there being particular kinds of dissonances or disharmonies or tensions or sufferings, and particular kinds of tools of harmonization that, when leveraged, just can unfold it much more quickly, much
Yeah,
more quickly.
I guess that just brings up John Vervaeke's point on the ecology of practices, and why there are multiple practices that flow in and out and come forth at the right time where you can call upon them. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
and so John Vervaeke and Jordan Hall had this conversation where they came up with this idea of a meta psychotechnology,
Mm.
which is
Sounds
uh,
complicated.
It is, but it is, you know, they come up with words and stuff, but like it just means like how do you decide which psychotechnology to deploy? And it ends up that this is really the $10,000 question, and this is really the thing that underlies education to a certain degree. When do you offer the right sort of stimulus or tool
Mm,
or you know, move to a mind in
mm,
order to afford the kind of transformation that you're endeavoring um, to open up to, and you know, in a certain respect, a monastery is a metapsychotechnology. The idea is that you enter into this culture, and the culture, through the teacher as well as the other people you're living with, sort of can help you find your way to the right move, the right psychotechnology, the right technique
mm.
that is needed, most needed for you at this time. Um, but and so the idea, in part with Willow, is could it be the case that a group, a collective intelligence, could be the metapsychotechnology? That we can have enough exposure to different practices and ways of relating to our suffering that we could um, participate with each other such that the right move could be made, right? That I might be able to see the key to unlock your suffering, just as you can see the key to mine. And it seems like that has proven to be, I mean, there's a lot of refinement to do. Believe me, this is like, I've got a laundry list of ways that I've made mistakes with this experiment. I hope I get another chance to try it. But it seems like there's something really there that you know, it's great if you can find an enlightened teacher. I'm so glad that I have been able to study with Soryu, but there's not enough of them to go around. We need other kinds of um, systems and spaces that can
Yeah.
robustly afford transformation.
If you enjoyed this clip, the full episode will be made available up here somewhere, so feel free to check that out. If you're someone that's interested in working one-on-one with me and developing your practice of presence, reflecting on your life at the moment, and calibrating your trajectory, then feel free to head over to todaydreamer.com and get in touch. There's also a full catalogue of episodes available on the website, which pretty much are there to help you cultivate the practice of presence so that you can more deeply participate in the blossoming of the emergent world story. So there's episodes on rituals, meditation, different ways you can cultivate presence, find meaning in life, working with psychedelics, and a whole host of other things that, you know, surround spirituality and surround this idea of coming back to this moment right here and right now, and deepening almost like your connection with yourself and with others through intimacy, relational practices. There's a whole host of episodes. Feel free to check it out if you're into that kind of stuff. Anyways, thank you for your attention and for sharing this moment with me in the here and now. And until next time, be well.